Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in our last session of the series. Joachim, over to you first to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you to the various panelists. My name is Meba Joachim. I am an environmentalist, functionary of the Ministry of Environment. I'm working on the National Agency for Environmental Management, which is in charge of environmental management and assessment. That should be it for me. That's okay by you, or do I need to flush it up?
That's great. Over to you, Fiona.
Good day, everyone. Thank you first to SST for inviting me to join this panel with my esteemed colleagues. I am Fiona Preston-Whyte. I have spent the last 2 decades combining my scientific expertise to research and finding solutions on 2 of the greatest challenges we face today, namely climate change and waste management or marine litter. These issues are intertwined with a similar basis of resource abuse and human behavior, whether measured institutionally, industrially, community-wise, on an individual scale. I am currently affiliated with Grid Arundel, and I'm working as an expert on marine litter globally with a focus on Africa.
Thank you, Fiona. Bernard?
Merci, bonjour à tous.
Thank you, good day, everyone. I'm sorry for missing the previous sessions. My name is Professor Yapo Bernard. I'm from Côte d'Ivoire, and I'm an expert on environmental issues. I'm a university lecturer, so I am a lecturer. I lecture on I'm an environmental chemist, so all issues related to chemistry with regard to environment are within my purview. And in terms of academic, I am in charge of a master's program on chemistry, health, environment. I'm head of that department. I'm also the deputy director of the main laboratory, the environmental laboratory in Côte d'Ivoire, and it is the CIAPOL, the Anti-Pollution Center division, and I'm under the authority of the Ministry of Environment in charge of issues related to pollution or littering, and including finding solutions to the challenge, to cope with the challenges of littering. Today, we know that for some years we've have an alert on the issue of pollution of sea and waterbeds, and we are now, the Côte d'Ivoire for some years now has been imbibing the issues, has been bracing up to cope with these issues and cope with the issue of the growing phenomenon of plastic littering on both oceans and land, and it's paramount for us to participate in such an outstanding and high-powered webinar. On this note, I would like to say thank you to everyone.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Merci, Tara.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Tara. Thank you to all that are following us. My name is Abdoulaye Diagana. I'm a geographer, and I work with the Abidjan Convention. I'm a researcher with the Arizona University at the Abidjan Convention. I'm in charge of that program. The ACP actually is a program aimed at building the capacities of ACP Africa and with regard to supporting the multilateral agreements on environment, anchoring pollution, environment. I'm in charge of the department, the communication and partnerships at the Abidjan Convention. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much indeed. My name's Tony Ribbink. I'm the CEO of Sustainable Seas Trust, and I'm helping to direct the Towards Zero Plastics to the Seas of Africa project. And I'm delighted to be here with you and most grateful to the Abidjan Convention for including the African Marine Waste Network, Sustainable Seas Trust, and the Towards Zero Plastic to the Seas of Africa program. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tony. We will be starting straight off with the question and answer session. So if any of the attendees have questions they would like to raise, please send those through in the Q&A box. In the meantime, I think we'll start with Joachim. What role does economics play in the development of action plans, and how do we surmount the challenges of lack of infrastructure and put forth the perception that there is value in plastic waste?
As I said earlier, I'm an environmental lawyer, I'm an expert, and I'm also part of academia, I'm part of faculty actually. So with regard to the role of economics in the planning of environmental issues, I think my perspective is that we need to encompass and imbibe the economic issue, because the challenge facing Africa is all the challenges boil down to the economic factor, going from the industrial units that are producing these plastics, and likewise the issue today of plastic littering of waste is paramount. It is paramount to have financial allocations to be able to hold awareness-raising drives that will aim at all the entire spectrum of stakeholders to merge and sum up our efforts, work as collectively in planning is always important to factor in the economic factor. If you're talking about circular economy, the recycling comes with a price tag, reuse comes with a price tag. So as a product, as a commodity, that will allow us to recycle into other products that also comes with a price tag. Therefore, the economic factor and the economic parameters that have to be taken on board and to sort of provide a holistic approach to managing the issue of plastic waste. I hope I'm making sense and that I'm addressing the question effectively. If you feel I need to caveat or clarify or flesh up any of my ideas, I will willingly, I will oblige. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. I think we'll move on to the question specified for the next panelist. But in the event of open questions, we will run through the panelists in the order that they appear on the screen. Should anyone have anything they wish to add, though, please feel free to raise your hand. For now, Fiona, what is the importance of education in the development of action plans?
So education itself is key, both in the development of action plans, but also in the implementation and leading to their ultimate success. Simply because education plays a key role in tackling marine litter, in tackling waste management, and it's for a number of reasons. In the very simplest forms, a knowledgeable population drives consumer choice, which drives industry. Then on a policy level, understanding why a government is asking you to make a particular change that affects your life, whether that's separating your organics from your other household waste at home, or paying a little bit extra on a product, such as you get with certain levies, or seeing the end of a type of material in a specific product, and not replacing it with a worse material, that all takes an understanding on an individual level to help the support of the population in helping that government policy. So education itself is key for a population to drive its own solutions, support change brought in by either industry or government, without making any or finding any loopholes that make the problem worse.
Thank you, Fiona. Bernard, can you comment on the importance of research in developing action plans?
Oui, l'importance de l'élaboration des plans d'action.
The drafting or hammering out of action plans cannot be overestimated. There are guidelines to steer that, and they carry objectives and they come with milestones and goals to help us achieve our goals. The issue of plastic littering today is very clearly has some challenges that comes with goals. We can, for instance, say that by 2030 we need to curtail the use of plastic bags, for instance, in our daily life. So that will come with sensitizing the population as to getting to buy into the use of a single plastic plastic meant for single use. So we have to be sync that with the policies, and hence the relevance of action plans and policies to ensure adequate management. With regard to research and development of these action plans, we cannot have action plans without research. As I'm speaking as a faculty, as a member of faculty, since the 60s, the issue of environment has come to the limelight. I'm having some technical issues here. Let me troubleshoot. So since the 60s, 70s, the plastic has been hitting the environment, and the impact on environment has been reported. This is when the whole thing started. Now, in my bibliography, I even have documentation, literature of the impact of plastic littering on health. And these are crucial questions that needs to be documented to better sensitize our populations, because today we need to understand that our life is all around plastics. If I look at my desk around here in my office, I can realize that about at least 50% of my hardware is made of plastic. What that would trickle down into the environment, and these are questions that are warranted in terms of sociology, in terms of chemistry, in terms of biology. There are a lot of questions that are warranted to steer the policies and culminate into drafting of national action plans. Therefore, this is a very relevant issue. We have the macroplastic issue, but our main concern as academia is the micro and macroplastic. And this is a thinking that has been going on for years, and we do realize that it is quite evidence that plastics have become major absorbers of heavy metals and other factors of pollution in the marine environment today. We do have the fisheries resources that are ending their course on our plate at the dining table. So we need to document that, to raise the alarm, and we need to educate our policymakers on the health impact. Hence the issue, the relevance of research that has to be a pillar to support action plans. This is what I would like to contribute as an initial thought, and I may come back if there's a need. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Abdoulaye, what would you say is the importance of policy in the development of action plans? Speaking as someone from UNEP.
Merci.
Thank you, Tara. You know, the Abidjan Convention and UN Environment, the goal is to provide a platform cooperation to all the countries on the coastline, the Atlantic, which is 20 countries from Mauritania up to South Africa. It is no gainsaying that nothing can be achieved without a strong will on the part of the policymakers in the absence of a clear-cut and strong and robust political will. On the other hand, our mandate is to equip the region with instruments for cooperation. So if we can come up with action plans as we looking forward to do that as part of this program with the support of UN Environment and EU. If we're able to hammer out these instruments, and then we can discuss the regional framework to curtail the issue of plastic waste that we can support. We're going to support the countries in hammering out their action plans. But at the end of the day, what can we do with regard to the national plans that are pegged to a regional plan if there is no ownership, if they are not trickling down into national action plans? Hence, obviously the legislator has to put in place a framework that will be conducive for a holistic management of plastic littering. Without that, we can have all the academia, the faculty work, and raise alarm on the issues related to, raising alarm with regard to health and other sectors. Unless the policymakers imbibe this issue, if there is no clear-cut framework or template, we are not going to go anywhere. Let me conclude by sharing an experience. Just 2 days ago, I was engaging a minister of one of the member countries of the Abidjan Convention on the process that is underway and the relevance to join the international momentum to have legally binding instruments. And the first thing that I heard from that minister is how to help the countries that do not have, where innovation is not really high. How do we go about helping them to ensure the efficacy and effectiveness of the legislation? One thing is to have the legislation. Another thing is to have them binding and implemented. If we just go by the motto of getting rid of plastic, we have to think about the alternative that we are offering in the stead of plastics, and these are questions that we need to imbibe, thinking outside the box. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. If anyone has any questions or comments, you can feel free to send those through in the Q&A box or in the chat, and you can either direct them at a specific panelist or you can open it to the panel as a whole. I see we do have a question here in the chat that says, thank you all for this engaging talk. Could I please ask Professor Yapo, how could we overcome the fact that Africa is data poor in order to allow research to inform action plans? Thank you for your insight.
For how to enable research to support in action plans? Well, let us point out clearly that research is the backbone of every development. Unfortunately, in our countries, research is, in fact, this is not translated into reality. Research in most countries, is not really, in the developed countries, research is the support, the pillar, the catalyst for development, because research is what allows you to come up with standards, with norms, with health standards, and steer the policies toward streamlining, coming come up with legislation with regard to an issue with alternatives. Through research, we can come up with alternatives to plastic use, for instance. Today, the plastic that is being used is the material that we are using is synthetic polymers. So there are some properties in terms of use, and these polymers are petroleum products, and the impact is quite known. In terms of impact on environment, today research has evidenced those. What did we come up with in terms of how to bring the laboratories that are into M&E? They should come up with a stock taking, a sort of balance sheet and come up with alternatives, alternative solutions. Therefore, research is to be a catalyst for decision making. Now, in our countries, our policymakers have to imbibe that dimension. Of course, we do have the question as to the issue of inadequate funding, but research can provide an avenue for coming up with homegrown solutions. So the other question is funding research. If you're able to fund research, we might come up with alternatives that might be conducive, that might sometimes that can help us to come up with solutions that are adapted, suitable.
Just to maintain our order, Joachim, would you like to add anything to that before we move on to the other panelists?
D'accord, j'avais voulu
All right, I wanted to pitch in, add to what Mr. Abdoulaye said when he was talking about the support to the states in coming up with legislation and to help the international community to cope with the issue of plastic littering. Of course, this is a relevant issue in the sense that in the various backs and forths, discussions and engagement, it emerged that most countries that are members of the Abidjan Convention have all imbibed or come up with a decree, a bill or legislation to cope with the issue, or even to ban the plastic material. Unfortunately, we can realize that none of the legislation really yielded the expected results. Therefore, we need to come up with alternatives in order to bring people to imbibe the solutions. And once we have no alternatives, you can expect that the behaviors will not turn around overnight. It is therefore crucial for countries to come up with mechanisms to support the effective management of plastic littering, so that we do not get, they don't end their course in the marine environment if you do not have the possibilities to manage plastic on the continent. I'm wondering how we'll be on the land. I'm wondering how we'll be able to cope with that in the microplastic and the macroplastic in marine environment. If you cannot do that on land, how are we going to do that at sea? Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona, would you like to add? And then we'll move on to Abdoulaye and Tony if they'd like to add any comments.
Yes, I would like to add. Thank you very much. And thank you to my two colleagues for their points first, and for Taylor for raising this point. I specifically want to come in on what Taylor was saying on the fact that Africa is notoriously data poor, and how do we, take into account that in order to allow research that informs action plans. Well, for a start, I just wanted to make very clear, although Africa is data poor generally and on this issue specifically, we do have enough data to inform and implement action plans at this point. We know that we have a major issue within marine litter. We know we have a major issue with marine litter across Africa. We know plastics are a key factor within that. And we have enough information both from the global data sets and from the African data sets that we have to implement an action plan. What we then need is very solid baseline data sets, which can be put in place in the meantime during the development of this action plan. And in those baseline data sets, which are being developed in the countries that don't have them yet, we can then use that going forward to monitor whether what we're doing with action plan is actually making a long-term change or not. So we're monitoring the mitigation and the long-term trends. But I just want to make it very clear that although we are data poor at this moment in time, we do have enough data to put together a comprehensive action plan. And what we need is the research monitoring how successful it is after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Abdoulaye, you look like you would like to add something.
Oui, merci Tara.
Yes, thank you, Tara. Yes, as a matter of fact, this issue raised by Joachim is really relevant. A number of countries did give it a try. They tried a couple of things and they fell through. because of a number of deficiencies. Maybe we can run a balance sheet. We have to see whether the political will was there, and there is an issue of leveraging the financial and economic levers and pillars, and see, you know, at the grassroots level whether that was anchored with regard to whether the issue raised with regard to research. That is really, I would say, that if there is an Achilles heel in everything that we are doing, our weakest point in terms of our overall management of plastic littering is the possibility of characterizing the level of littering and what classifies, the categorizing the products and specifying and assessing the impact on the economy, on infrastructure. And for those that followed the previous webinar sessions, especially when we had speakers on the issue of this gap, this missing link in terms of data collection in Africa, that question emerged. In terms of research, our countries are not at the table. You know, I did engage a donor at the point in time. At least the question was to find during the pilot phases to spearhead the research of 5 or 6 countries, collecting data in 5 or 6 countries to support and inform in a very clear and effective the policies that are going to be hammered out. One thing is to define policies, but unless they are evidence-based, that is resting on the involvement of academia, faculty, and research community. If you run a poor diagnosis, you are likely to come up with a poor prophylaxis. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. Tony, would you like to add anything? And then we'll move back to Bernard.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I'm very happy with the contributions made by these esteemed colleagues. One of the things about data is that it does give us the power to actually measure. And it's often said that without measurement, one cannot manage. And Fiona was talking about developing baselines, and some of you might well know that the African Marine Race Network has developed systems which is shared with a number of countries that are working simultaneously with us to develop baselines, to develop measurement programs. And then, as Fiona also indicated, once you've got these measurements, once you have an idea of what what the level of the problem is, then one can put in place the mechanisms, the interventions that should take us away from that. And by virtue of the monitoring program, we can determine whether or not we are actually working well, and if not, the management plan has to be altered. So that is so really important. In addition to that, having these sorts of tools available means that one can actually program and develop predictive models, because we know that things are changing. We know that there's urbanization. We know there's population growth. We know that there's economic development. We can factor these in. So I think that we're well on the way to getting the sort of data that are required. And there are various ways of measuring them. The measurements can be done by remote sensing. Using satellites are not as effective as we'd like. They can measure certain things, but drones, aeroplanes with the correct photogrammetric materials, and other measurements are all possible. Counting, measuring in the streets. So all of these provide measurements which give an assessment. But against that also, we know that municipalities are collecting data on, well, many of them are, not all of them are, collecting data in terms of what are they collecting, where it's going, and there's those sorts of bits of information that are important too. We also have an idea of what is being imported into countries and what is being developed within those countries in terms of plastics. So we are developing the data. So to answer Taylor's questions, yes, methods and innovations in terms of measuring to give us the evidence and the capacity to determine whether or not our interventions are working is a way forward. I also was intrigued by the comment, how can we measure and manage the macroplastics, the mesoplastics, and the microplastics in the marine environment? And I think that's a superb question, because we've got to recognize in Africa that our resources are limited. And perhaps we should adopt the philosophy that if we manage the macroplastics on land and we reduce the microplastics on land, then we will actually be taking a big step to also reducing the amount of mesoplastics and microplastics that enter the sea. Because if those macroplastics are not given the opportunity to break down into smaller pieces to become meso and microplastics, and they therefore don't go into the seas, then maybe we should say, as one of our policy approaches would be, and it could also be, of course, an action plan process, it should be to let us focus on that which we can do best, most effectively, most economically, and manage the macroplastics, understanding that the others will also improve as a consequence. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Tony. Bernard, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add a further comment?
Yes, let me pitch in to add salt to what I've just heard by Tony. Generally, when we talking about plastic management, in the inventories that are run, usually I only see the macroplastic, the visual macroplastic. But when you take stock, you can you can bring to the limelight the issue of microplastic that may not be visible, that are ending their course in the environment. That is what prompted me to pinpoint monitoring and taking stock invisible microplastics that are in the environment. Command being documented as part of a stock taking and as part of the management of plastic as a holistic approach. Because all the policies that are rolled out, are dealing with what strikes the eye. But we do have other elements that may not hit the eye, and that are likely to impact our life, our health. So that component of particles that are generated by industrial activities and water sanitation and water cleaning, industrial water cleaning plants do not produce macroplastics, but rather microplastics. I can think of cosmetics that are producing microplastics that are ending their course through sewage water. So this is a dimension that sometimes is precluded in the assessment. When you take all the surveys in our countries, usually people take on board the issue of collection, and whether you have a collection or a plastic collection or recycling policy. But I think we need to buttress the non-visible aspect or dimension, which is probably falls within the purview of monitoring laboratories, that needs to be supported to strengthen the assessment of plastic littering as impact on environment. This is my bottom line.
Thank you, Bernard.
Merci.
I see, Washi, that your hand is raised. Would you like to add something further?
Oui, merci. Je veux juste...
Yes, thank you. Let me just add a little point with regard to the plastic littering management infrastructure, which is an oversight, which I didn't discussed in my when I had the floor. Through the various awareness raising drives that I was involved in, there is a recurring question, especially with regard to the household, which is even my own house. My wife keeps all the plastic, and at some point she was asking herself as to what she could do with all the plastic bags, whatever that I have her pack in the house. So that takes us to the issue of providing a holistic approach to the plastic waste. And more, in spite of the goodwill, we stalled. It is true that in the various discussions, we do realize that there are initiatives on the part of NGOs, on the part of youths that are trying to recover, collect, and transform this plastic waste into something else. But that activity is not adequate if the governments do not make available resources and means to support stakeholders with adequate and effective infrastructure to effectively cope with the issue of plastic littering. Because as the issue is being imbibed by NGOs, by youths, by entrepreneurs, this is a way of we're just shifting the littering or transforming it into something that might still end up being waste. We need to take steps so to ensure that once the plastic waste gets into the system, it could be fully transformed into something that is usable for a long time. This is another thing that needs to be buttressed. We do need to understand today that waste is beyond being a cumbersome object, but it can be an object that can be assigned an alternative or accessory merit or value that can be of use. So I'm just throwing these nuggets. We need to circumvent this perception of plastic waste, not refraining from seeing them as just waste, but rather some waste that can be transformed into something useful. That's what I wanted to further contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, you had your hand raised, and then Abdoulaye would like to add a further comment.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I definitely agree with the professor. Where microplastics are causing economic problems, then we certainly need to deal with them. So, and firstly, let's start with the microbeads, which used to be put in most countries, used to be put into cosmetics and soaps and other things. I think that they should be totally banned because most countries have done that already. And this should really be something that we stop. And also, we've got the problems, economic problems in the marine environment too, because microplastics do have the capacity to adsorb and absorb toxins and heavy metals. And these can be biomagnified up the food chain, and they can ultimately affect very negatively fisheries. In fact, they can cause the closure of fisheries if those fisheries are shown to be toxic to the end users and the health of people. So certainly there. What I was doing, as I was saying, I was trying to answer that question, how can we manage the microplastics, the mesoplastics, and the macroplastics in the marine environment? And I just felt that the economics of that, when it's not answering a specific health or economic question, it would be quite difficult for us to do that. But if we focused on the macroplastics, then we would, in a way, be managing what goes into the seas. But yes, I totally agree with the professor. Where it goes, where we're dealing with a specific economic problem, we're doing that. And Sustainable Seas Trust, through its Towards Zero Plastic to Seas of Africa program, is actually looking at microplastic toxicity in the food chain and how it might affect humans. So thank you for that I was talking more specifically about managing in the sea. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Over to you, Abdoulaye.
Merci beaucoup, Tony. Merci.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you, Abdoulaye Joachim. There is quite a lot to say, but since time is not on our side, let me fast track. Of course, Joachim, the issue that you raised is that we need to take steps to collect or sort plastic waste, and then we don't know what are going to be the outlets once we've collected and sorted out. Hence, the issue raised by the minister, the cabinet member that I engaged 2 days ago. He's not the only one. The silver lining, and this is valid for everyone, Tony, all the conventions and SST, WWF. So let me caveat. We do have a number of high-powered stakeholder players that would like us to come with concrete proposals. When I invite them to join the international movement for the legally binding treaty, they said in our countries, concretely, we have a legislation that is ready, and we need your expertise to help us to have policies for an effective management of policies that will be effective against the policies. And at the level of the Abidjan Convention, please get ready, brace up to be in contact with all these people. So with regard to the issue of microplastic, and there was Professor Mamadou Barrow, the first on the international treaty, what we could do is we need to go from national action plans to feed the treaty. We can take it both sides. It can be an umbrella approach, a holistic approach. At the international level, we can have the treaty, and we can request the countries to conform with the commitments in the treaty. We can also have another approach that to me is more relevant, and that comes with an inconvenience. We can go from the national action plans, the action plans that will have taken stock of the challenges, the needs, and have all that in an action plan, and we need to find the allocation to support that financially, and then these action plans that have been collected nationally should serve to document and feed the treaty internationally speaking. That is going to be more time consuming, and also that will request the highest level of involvement of policymakers in those countries, and also that will require bargaining power with regard to the expertise in each of these countries, which will ultimately help us to peg that to the Mamadou Barrow's concern. Obviously, once we have those action plans, we'll see whether there is no inclusive approach that will pool all the expertise that may come from all the parts, the players, civil society, the policymakers, and the experts, the academia, the researchers, and to make sure we don't miss out on anything, and to see if that is likely to encompass all the viewpoints. And once we have an action plan, if we have no assessment, it's going to be difficult to ultimately take stock of what has been done in terms of achieving our initial goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. We have some questions that have come through here in the Q&A box. The first one here is from the Center of International Environmental Law, and it says, "Thank you for the webinar. Do you believe that plastic action plans should be an essential part of a possible international plastics treaty? And what are the particulars that should be taken into account in different regions?" I think we'll go back to our standard order. So, Joachim, would you like to start with some answers there, or any comments you may have?
La question est de savoir si les plans d'action
wants to know whether the national action the action plans. The question is to see if the action plans could be fully part and parcel of the legally binding treaty, right? Well, we have Mr. Abdoulaye said it rightly. The action plans are planning tools and implementation tools of what has been decided upon. In that case, in that scenario, the action plans contribute to implementing the multilateral agreements that have been ratified by the states. The action plans contribute to implementing the various policies and legislation and regulation at the national level. So the action plans, national action plans, be it regional or national action plans, are not fully part and parcel of the agreement itself, but they are just an implementation and tool of the multilateral agreement. And they are also a planning tool and the implementation tool. And as Abdoulaye said, these are tools that allow us to program the modus operandi in the sector, our mode of operation in the sector, and we need to have a monitoring plan that will take into account our programming and taking stock of what has been done in terms of achievements and failures and the various justifications or explanations for what was achieved and for what was not achieved. And that helps us to draw conclusions and draw lessons that can help us to go to a more effective implementation. This is what I may say on that issue.
Thank you. Fiona, would you like to add to that question?
Yes, I would. Firstly, I'm just going to send a link to the chat box, which I've just shared with you all. It's a report that's just been released, and it's called Exploring the Option of a New Global Agreement on Marine Plastic Pollution, a Guide to the Issues. I think it very nicely deals with the possibility of bringing in an international treaty, and I invite you to all read it. And then I agree with both Abdullah and Joachim's comments that they have just made. And then I just want to add in on the regional side specifically. So how do you look at regional differences? And I think that is the correct understanding of what the translation from French into English there is what you've got to remember from around the world, although we're all facing the same problem from a point of view of marine litter, solutions have to be regionally specific, and to some extent they have to be nationally specific. But regionally specific is very, very important, simply because something that works somewhere, such as in Europe, will not necessarily work in Africa. And we have seen time and time again developed countries developing concepts and then almost insisting in exchange for the funding of their solutions being implemented into the developed countries. And then those solutions are not for the conditions within that area. And so the solution fails. But at the same time, you have these fantastic innovative solutions coming through. And Africa is a fantastic example of that, where we have these brilliant innovative solutions. And what we need to do is look at the regional differences and the conditions within Africa specifically, and do the pilot studies of the innovative solutions that are working within Africa so they can spread out regionally, rather than taking solutions from other regions that are almost put down on a top-heavy approach into Africa and don't work in the conditions that occur within Africa. I think that's all I've got to say on that for now.
Thank you, Fiona. Bernard, would you like to add anything for this question?
Sorry, I haven't understood. Have you asked if we would like to add something?
Je pense que oui, vous m'avez demandé si vous pouvez acheter quelque chose.
Yes, I think I'm being requested. Yes, I would like to add something. As Joachim said, And I think he answered that question. The agreements that we have in place that we have to be, we need to domesticate them, to mainstream them in the action plans. These are well thought agreements that are supported by technical and scientific evidence. So we need to see the possibility of domesticating them in national plans and working in tandem with our policymakers. That's what I wanted to say. That's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Abdoulaye.
Thank you, and sorry, Tara. Thank you, Fiona, for what you said. I totally agree with you, and I think that this is the reason why here in the Abidjan Convention, in this framework, we are trying to develop a legal framework for our region to gather what the stakeholders are thinking about this question in the whole 22 countries of the Abidjan Convention. Because now, what is the situation? The current global governance on plastic pollution is totally fragmented and ineffective. So if you want to be effective, I think we need to start from the region, from the regional scale or the national scale, and then try to adapt something at the international level. So I totally agree with what you said. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. Tony, would you like to add anything for this question?
One of the advantages of being lost is that what you wanted to say is said. So I actually agree with what's going on, what they're saying. Essentially, a national action plan is geared to the needs of the country, but it may make a contribution to an international treaty, provided some of the best practices within that national plan apply internationally. So yes, they're specific to the nation. They shouldn't be imposed, international treaties shouldn't be imposed on a nation, but the other way around. The nation might have best practices that can be absorbed into an international treaty. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. There's another question here in the Q&A box that says, good afternoon, wonderful series, very informative. I have a question for Fiona. What tools do you feel are most important with regards to educating people on issues relating to plastic waste? And how do we educate people in a way that makes them hopeful and positive about the change they can make? If any of the other panelists would like to add to this, please feel free to raise your hand. Fiona, over to you.
Thank you for the question. For a start, I think Samantha has already highlighted a very good tool in the question itself, in that hopeful and positive feelings are always more powerful than the negative counterparts. And it's been shown countless different areas of or disciplines that this is the case if you want to lead to a more longer term behavior change. Now, what exact tool is needed within educating, or which tools there are further than that? Well, I think you need to approach this in the same way you approach any science communication. You always start with who is your audience? What is important to them? Remember, there is no such thing as a general audience. So one of the issues I think we hit with marine litter, plastic waste, is we often approach this from a point of view of, let's do a general thing where we show, for example, a turtle with a straw stuck in it, and then we're going to meet everyone's audience. And that's not the case. You've got to look at what's important to the people you're speaking to. So for example, if you are talking to a child who has grown up in a rural area and has no relationship with the sea, has never seen the sea, to them, telling them that how they are dealing with their plastic waste, they'll be helping save a turtle or a fish down the line, but not letting the plastic go into it, will not have an impact. Approaching them from a point of view of having a clean area to play, or something that's important to them as an individual or a community, is going to be more powerful. In the same way, if you want to encourage reusable diapers, for example, approaching it from an economic point of view, it's slightly cheaper on the whole, depending which ones you buy, obviously. But if you don't go for the very expensive ones that are trying to sell a green approach, but you go for practical reusable diapers, they will be cheaper long term than using reusable diapers. So that is very specific for another type of person. And then if you want to approach someone, for example, who works really, really long hours, so I'm talking within industries that work from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. So you're looking at, you know, some of your top lawyers, some of your top bankers, all your biggest firms. Telling them that they cannot have a takeaway plastic fork with their dinner is not helpful. What is more helpful is approaching your big companies and getting them to implement within their kitchens, or within, because a lot of them have their own cafeterias within them, rather approach them to have the reusable products there rather than the disposable. So what I'm trying to say is have a look at exactly what you're trying to achieve, and you don't make it generic. You make it specific to the person and the community that you're trying to reach and the item you're trying to reach. And you always do it in a way that is helpful to them. So for the example of the person who is spending their entire life working and has got to take away food and is working very late, they will prefer to use a good quality knife and fork because it doesn't make them feel so bad, for example, as using a disposable plastic knife and fork. For a child who you're trying to teach not to litter but has never seen the sea, telling them about the turtles isn't going to help them, but helping them to see that they can live and play in a clean field, that will help them. I hope that helps answering that question.
Thank you, Fiona. Joachim, I see you have your hand raised. Would you like to comment?
Yes, let me just pitch in by saying a couple of words on this specific issue as to what are the tools, additional tools that can be used. Fiona had already hinted at educating, awareness raising. We shouldn't be afraid of feeble beginnings. That is buttressing youth and infancy. The children and infants are key players and are part of the solution, because they risk bearing the brunt of our mistakes. Hence the imperative to begin by training, by sensitizing, educating children on the challenges and issues of hygiene, sanitation, and plastics, to see how tangibly that can be inculcated or impregnated into their minds, so that as they grow up, they have that as part of their material, and because they are part of the solutions. So therefore, we need to buttress education from kindergarten. I would say it is true that our governments have already started through training in the universities on issues of waste management and environmental management. But we can take it to the lower strata, like kindergarten, primary schools, primary education, on how to better manage littering. One of the issues, one of the players is the local governments today. The mayors in the various municipalities have a crucial role to play, because at the end of the day, the issue of daily management of waste is within the purview of local government. So we need to buttress sensitizing these stakeholders and support them, and with mechanisms and facilities, with technical support that will bring them to a level of competitiveness in the matters of a fight against littering. This is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Abdoulaye, you had your hand
Merci,
raised next,
Abdoulaye, vous avez la main levée. Oui, I wanted to add, with regard to this issue of educating. Fiona raised my attention on the way forward. Once we've dealt with the main players, we need to involve the youth. That is why at the Abidjan Convention, as part of this program, this LCP, this program, at the end of what will be done here, we're looking forward with the cooperation of African Sustainable SST and Atlantic Forum, WWF or whatever. We would like to create a sort of network of young ambassadors of the Abidjan Convention that are going to be the flag bearers of these issues. So we need to find our champions from the lower stratum. I do fully agree and welcome the fact that that question has to be not just on the seashore. He mentioned a little infant that is in rural settings, who is on continent, rather, who is not on who has never seen the sea, the ocean. That warrants attention because we are, as experts, we know that the littering in the ocean comes through the rivers, the watersheds, waterbeds, and what have you. So I couldn't concur more. We need to aim lower from kindergarten and lower age. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. Bernard, you have your hand raised.
Oui, effectivement,
Yes, talking about, discussing sensitizing, I think that boils down to the management of waste in Africa. That is the challenge in Africa. Of course, last year we did carry out a project on the management of macro waste, plastic waste in abundance. We did realize that we're having difficulties with regard to regenerating. We had a document in which the various players were part of a sensitization drive. And that is a holistic approach to awareness. We're talking about educating, but who are we educating? This goes beyond children, beyond the younger ones. We have to educate the institutions. We have to educate our policymakers. We did realize that there are 3 layers of accountability with regard to the institutions, with regard to the industrial manufacturing and the industrialist and the population and what have you. So the issue of management of waste boils down to that. And is a key link, one of the weakest links of the policies in our countries, especially in the countries. The issue of governance is raised here with acuity. Sometimes you're battling to find who is accountable and for the waste, and we cannot, avoid these issues. The issue of awareness raising cannot be overestimated. I think that falls on the shoulders of everyone. Both the government, the policies have to be well defined. Sharing the Ivorian experience, we did have a decree on the banning of production and use of plastic bags in Côte d'Ivoire. After 10 years, that decree has been around for 10 years. As Abdoulaye said, these are laws that are on paper, but they cannot be implemented because the populations are blaming, are scapegoating the government or the policymakers. So I think we need to think deep dive, and with that goes through awareness raising, because we need to feel the commitment of our states and the authorities at the level of our municipalities in terms of management of and with regard to the population. So we have to sort in the households. We need to have a holistic approach. And we have to because sometimes we have good awareness raising that go through information drive, and the population may not have imbibed the key messaging, the catchwords of the campaign, which is basically behavioral change. So this is in a nutshell the challenge. I could share this document, and each one should see the gaps with regard to our vision in terms of sensitizing and mass community awareness raising. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. I see there's a question here from Mabadou in the chat that says, thank you to the panel. How do you promote participatory monitoring and evaluation of the plans at a local level? That wasn't directed at anyone specifically, so I think let's run through the panel order. Joachim, would you like to start? Do you have anything to comment on there?
Je pense que l'approche participative, c'est-à-dire est incontournable. C'est-à-dire, elle est incontournable dans la mesure où la participation, elle doit d'abord commencer. Et déjà, il y a un petit problème là. Allô? Oui, il y a une interférence là.
Interference on my side.
Allô?
Allô, allô?
Je peux aller?
C'est le cas ici aussi. En fait, nous entendons la traduction anglaise sur le canal français.
Voilà. Donc, je disais que le problème...
I was saying that the issue of participatory approach is a key because it's a paramount and participation has to start from the elaboration of the messaging tools so that the various players can intervene and take ownership of the messaging and the tools. Participation is key in the sense that it raises accountability in the various players, in the various stakeholders, and each will imbibe the responsibility of his actions. And that is indispensable in terms of environment today. It is no gainsaying that nothing can be done alone, single-handedly. So everyone, all the stakeholders have to be involved to first of all bring them to understand and to contribute, to respond, to help, to monitor, to prevent natural hazards. I think awareness raising is key, and it has to be in a participatory approach, or else we stand to lose everything. Because if at a point in time you have the feeling that people have to come and work, and we will only be there as recipients, it means that the work will never be sustained. Whereas unless we participate directly to contribute our effort, our comments, to contribute everything that is needed to sustain.
Le travail ne pourra pas être exhaustif et ne pourra pas être efficace. La participation, elle est fondamentale, elle est la clé de départ de toute question, de toute gestion efficace et durable de l'environnement. Merci.
Thank you. Fiona, would you like to add?
Yes, thank you. So looking at how do you promote participatory M&E, monitoring and evaluation of plans at the local level, I think you actually take it a step further. You don't just promote it, you require it. You write it into the action plans, and your monitoring and evaluation is through your indicators. So you have your common indicators. So that would be things like how much litter per 100 meters of beach in the different countries reported every year, for example. There's other types of common indicators that you could use as well, but it's indicators that each country is required on a yearly basis to then monitor. And that gives you your overall long-term time series. and that allows on a local level to see what's changing. But more than that, I think it's actually quite important, and quite a few of your regional action plans and even your national action plans around the world that have already been developed leave this step out. I think it's quite important to have indicators also on the level of each action. So for each action, you have a requirement that comes in. It will either be in the form of a report from the different countries, or a form of a legislation passed, or a form of your monitoring has been expanded into so many new areas. It is something like that, some measurable a qualitative way or quantitative way that you have of measuring that your actions are actually being put in place and that they are making the difference that you're wanting them to make. So I think it is a requirement of the action plan to have it built into the action plan, how you're actually going to measure it through indicators. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Bernard, would you like to add anything to this question?
Oui, il faudrait que ces plans d'action puissent...
Yes, these action plans have to impact change. They have to ignite behavioral change, because that is the bottom line. Action plans should impact change, and how can we gauge them once they are on course? I think in Côte d'Ivoire, we tried an experience with our sociologists, social scientists. We battling to put in place a way to gauge behavioral change to see whether that's part that's made with regard to the citizen buy-in. I must confess that this is quite tedious. We're talking about indicators here. We're discussing with social scientists. I take the case of Abidjan, or the entire population, to see awareness raising and how we gauge in a factual manner and that activity on the behavioral change, and what indicator allows us to measure that in the monitoring part to see what should be improved upon, and this is a whole challenge. But as I said, awareness raising should help us to get to the behavioral change. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Bernard. Abdoulaye, would you like to add anything?
No, merci.
Tony, would you like to add to this question?
Thank you. Not necessarily to the question, but to the answer. I think that Fiona has covered very well the monitoring and evaluation. So I just focus on the participatory component, which is also covered by Professor Yapo. And that is that I do need to encourage people to participate. And one of the ways of doing that is through citizen science activities, and to encourage people to know that they're part of a worthwhile experiment, know that they're part of something which is international, and to also share the way in which things are being done, not only within countries locally, but also beyond that. So yes, to encourage participation, I think, is important. There are costs to it, of course, because we all know that research scientists like to get on with their work, and they don't necessarily feel that they like to involve others, but I think arrangements should be made to promote citizen science as well. So that's just a different spin on it, but I totally agree with what was said on monitoring and evaluation by the others, and also the awareness.
Thank you, Tony. We have another question that says, are there any disciplines or facets which have been overlooked in this series which contribute to the plastic pollution problem? Or are there any major role players who have been omitted that should be considered during the creation of action plans? I think we'll stick with the panel order for one more question, then we can reverse it. So Joachim, would you like to comment?
Je ne vous ai pas bien suivi. Il y a tellement du bruit, je n'avais...
Joachim, did you hear the question?
Non, pas du tout, pas du tout. J'entends tellement du bruit.
To answer that question, if you think there are issues that need to be taken on board in the planning process, we did talk about a number of things, and we did forget the issue of plastic waste in marine waste. is not just produced in marine environment. And most of the time, they come from elsewhere. So in the planning process at the regional level, I would have loved to take into account the countries of the hinterland, where the work has to be done upstream, downstream, to support the process of planning and implementation at the Abidjan Convention, without forgetting the relevance and the need to showcase that the management of plastic waste is fully in sync with the goals, sustainable development goals, for which our countries, because if you take the sustainable goal number 14, we need to be able to work on the continent and impact the sea environment that may likely impact the marine environment. So we need to take those aspects into account. We need to take into account the issue of circular aspect, the circular economy with regard to waste, to allow the youth and the children and the policymakers and the stakeholders that are involved directly in the issue of plastic waste to help them to see whether the waste can be an object of value that can be reused, that can be recycled, that can be sent back into the production of allow us to move to forge ahead. So as such, the waste will no longer be waste, but it can be a solution. As some people say, instead of being a trivial or cumbersome waste, can become waste that can be transformed to have something very useful. Thank you. This is what I wanted to
add. Thank you. Fiona, would you like to add anything on this topic?
Yes, I would. Thank you. For starts off, I think you put together a very comprehensive webinar series that involved some very key stakeholders. And obviously, there's limited time in how many that you can put in with in a series. So I think a lot of it's not so much as overlooked, but who can contribute next. And I'm going to start with sea-based sources specifically. And I think within the fishing and shipping and transport industry, there's more stakeholders that can be taken into account. I know you had the Go Scary initiative as part of the series, but one also then needs to look at very specific sources. And there's a lot of NGOs working on this, especially on practical local scales. I think those stakeholders can specifically go into the building on the national actions as opposed to within the regional action plan. But within this whole area, I think we need to look at the role players of those who deal with port reception facilities. We need to talk to IMO and having a look at what's coming in through the borders. And that specifically brings me into if you're looking at either illegal transboundary movement of waste, or if you've banned certain substances from coming into the country also, and you want to stop that. What you then also need to take into account, and I know you had the Basel Convention on the series as well, but you need more than that. You need to actually get the custom officials and the port control agents on board in the discussions, because they provide two very important roles here. One is in monitoring of what is actually coming in and getting those numbers. So we spoke earlier about data poor. We need data on that side. And also to understand their challenges. It might be that within the action plan, we write it in that that's one of the indicators and that, you know, that is something that needs to happen. But there might be challenges in place that they cannot deliver at this moment on that. And then how do you overcome those challenges? So that's covering from sort of the sea-based side, but also within the transport industry side. And the last point I want to bring up, it actually links in very nicely with Professor Yapo's point that he made in the very last point. So I'm really glad this question followed next. But I do think it's very important to take into account and and have your social scientists working on your indicators and your next steps of awareness that, more so because within your action plan, and this comes back to the question on how you do monitoring and evaluation, you need to be able to measure, and I acknowledge that this is a global issue, is we battle to measure what the impact is on perceptions and behavior change of education and awareness on the long term. Short term, there's quite a bit of research and work on that, but on the long term, that is what we need to measure, especially for how impactful the action plan is from a point of view of implementing behavior change if you're looking at from an awareness point of view. And I also think it's very important at the same time to take into account work on, and it doesn't have to be very solid research from a point of view of actually, you know, quantitating it and that, but you need to look at if something is not, that's in the action plan is not being rolled out on the ground, why not? And or if it's written in to be in the action plan and no one raised at the beginning that it couldn't be rolled out, or if an issue was raised at that point. What I'm trying to say is sometimes the reason behavior change is not happening can be very simple. You are not managing to, you don't have household waste collection on a regular basis, and therefore your waste is going into the environment. That is a very simple barrier. That has to do with how a community's waste is actually collected. It's a very obvious one. But sometimes you have more nuanced changes. And I think the social scientists specifically have a huge role to play here in monitoring long-term behavior change so that we get it right, to that our awareness campaigns and our behavior change ones work, and then don't stop because there's some form of barrier that is as simple as someone wants to make the change, but they either can't because there's an economic barrier, or they can't because there's no alternative available. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Bernard, would you like to add to this?
Effectivement, vous avez posé la question.
Yes, you did ask the question as to whether there are some aspects that were not adequately taken on board. I would say that with the intervention of our colleague that was highlighting the role of social scientists. That makes sense because plastic has a social role because it's part of our habits, and some habits die hard. Hence, the need for sociologists or social scientists to get us away from plastics. I think there's a push of recycling commands to be captured in our action plans. Because as Joachim said, the plastic waste is also raw material. We need to see how in our strategic it is a challenge for the citizens, for the industries and the government. We need to cope with that together because that is beyond the purview of any single entity. In Côte d'Ivoire today, we have a lot of recycling activities of plastic and a lot of industrial units dealing with plastic. So downstream, that's the whole population involved in plastic through sewage and that are reconditioning them and selling them back to the industrialists. This is volunteering. This is based on the volunteering, and if we can formalize and make this more attractive, it will go a long way in curtailing downstream the volume of plastics in our sewage, and that is that is carried away by heavy rainfall. So these are very crucial issues. I was surprised that when we paid visits to some of the entities, I realized that some of the self-trained, self-taught groups, the different types of plastic, then they know how to sort them, how to categorize them, and this is something that I'm, hands-on. On the job. So we need to get into how to bring the youth to take ownership of some of these practices, such as recycling and reconditioning of plastic, that can be made into a craft, into a profession. We have young craftsmen today that are using plastics for road building. There are some that are using them that are recycling them for reuse in the households. So these are things that we need to imbibe in our strategies, allow the government to draw the policymakers' attention. We need also to have charters on the plastics and on our behavior vis-a-vis the oceans, because all the coastline countries, we have a coastline population. They cannot have the same attitude or behavior with regard to the plastic, because the impact on the coastline is not the same as on the non-coastline area. So there is a sensitizing work to be done vis-a-vis the relationship with the oceans, and the plastic single use have to be mainstreamed in our strategies. So we need to discuss that adequately, and as I said, we need to bring the research to find material, alternative material that can help us to take on board the use of microplastics. There are ways to go about this in helping our communities to trade the good path. So these are some nuggets that I would like to share that can be part of the action plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Abdoulaye, Tony, would you like to comment before we hand over to the last question?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Bon, je vais pas revenir.
Yes, thank you, Tony. I wouldn't come back to the issues that have been discussed already, not adequately. Let me just speak in on the testimony that have been shared and by some stakeholders. We need to find alternatives. We need to, and we did not insist on that enough. What are we going to propose to the peanut seller, to the fish seller, to replace the plastic bags, for instance, or the households that use plastic bags or whatever. So I think, and those that are deciding at the policy level say we put in place the plastic bans and no one is, and we're lacking, so with regard to those players that were not involved adequately, I would have loved, we have ministries, and with regard to central governments, and to take stock of what did not work well and how. I would like also to have representatives, the local governments, those that are handling waste on a daily basis that were not adequately in attendance. It would have been good to have their viewpoints on this issue of plastic issues, and there are other segments, and other segments, the policymakers. I could add the local officials. We have the MPs, the senators, because they will, those that are going to enact the laws, and I'm also footing the bill for that, and we have there are two other participants that I'd like to see the issue of gender, women as a group. They have a role to play. The women that are smoking fish or whatever, and we also lacking the youth. So we should have involved the youth and listen to their viewpoints. So
So in my opinion, these are the other stakeholders that we could have involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. Tony, would you like to add to this before we move on to the last question?
I thought that we did manage to cover the major topics fairly comprehensively. Clearly, there are gaps. One of the gaps that I thought that we should possibly have considered is electronic waste. And as Abdoulaye just alluded to, also plastic substitutes, their potential, their challenges and so forth. I do know that one of the speakers earlier on touched on this, but something we didn't touch on. But what is important is that these inputs today have value because there will be a compilation of all of these speeches, all of the talks, all of the questions are going to come together in a booklet form, and we can fill some of the gaps there so that it can get to decision makers and others going forward. So thank you. That's all I have to say on that.
Thank you, Tony. I'm aware of the time, so I don't think we want to keep people too late this afternoon. I think we can close with this final question here in the Q&A box, and we can reverse the order of the panelists for this one. So is there a role for plastic bans in action plans? And if so, can you provide some examples of where they have or haven't been successful, and perhaps why they haven't been successful or they have succeeded? I think we can reverse the panel order for this. So we'll start with Tony and then Abdoulaye and then Bernard, Fiona and Joachim. Tony?
But thank you. This is a very contentious issue. Partly because plastic bans are imposed without sufficient investigation, which I think Abdoulaye touched on a moment ago. But there are some bans, which we also mentioned earlier, that are sort of no-brainers at all. And that is taking microbeads out of toothpaste, cosmetics, and this sort of thing. That sort of plastic ban I'd recommend. There are also bans that could be encouraged in terms of some of the single-use aspects, such as straws and so forth, particularly if there are alternatives. But then one of the problems that one has with bans is that generally they are made by people in fairly affluent situations, and they don't consider adequately the inconvenience and the costs that will occur to the lower income groups within their country. And those are the people who probably most need plastics, which can carry their goods in rainy weather without falling apart. They can actually help to store them. They are beneficial to them. So I think that while there may be a cause for bans, it does need to be very carefully considered in every country to look at, and Professor Yapo sort of touched on these, we need to look at the socio-economic consequences of the bans, particularly in the poorer communities. So they need to be approached much more carefully than just, let's do it because this will probably look good. So there is likely to be a plan, has to be well researched, has to be considerate, and has to be inclusive in finding how it might impact with different communities. Thank you. I think that's all I need to say for that.
Thank you, Tony. Abdoulaye, would you like to comment?
Merci, Tara. Merci.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Tony. Thank you to the person that raised the question. Of course, I realize that there is
un embargo sur leur production, sur leur vente, sur leur importation, etc.
Especially plastics, single-use plastics that may cause damage, especially in the environment. We have steps that have been made from legislation perspective in Senegal and Mauritania in our area, and even Cote d'Ivoire. The expected results. Senegal got back to a new experience in 2020 because, in my humble opinion, there is a number of steps have been. We have poor preparation, no proper downstream preparation for everyone. The rationale in that work was just imposed in a dictatorial fashion. The second reason behind the failure is that we had some reluctance, a very strong reluctance on the part of the industry, simply because I think alternatives were not brought to the table. When you're dealing with people invest millions in the production of plastics, when you ask that person to shun away from using plastics and you don't come with an alternative, the industry is not to gain. So policymakers could have involved the industries downstream before implementing the issue. There is also the issue of the consumer himself, who was not sensitized enough on the perils involved with the use and handling of plastics. And there is also the failure to put on the market some stopgap measures to curtail the use of plastics. And of course, these all ended up in a failure because the equilibrium between motivating, incentivizing, and backing was botched. Hence, the miscommunication, and the people were just jumped on this opportunity to fall back to the use of plastic. So in the future, we need to draw lessons for all these failures and experiences and better brace up for more effective measures. Thank you.
Oui, pour enchérir.
Yes, I just wanted to add my own 5 cents to what you said from the process. It has been said it was the issue of awareness raising, and it is crucial in the policy making because in Côte d'Ivoire, the 2012 decree on banning plastics fell through because there was a poor communication, poor messaging between the government and the stakeholders, and you can fathom, you can anticipate that plastic is used a lot excessively in daily life of the communities. So with regard to the water producers in Côte d'Ivoire, we don't have a lot of. I'm not talking about water. I'm talking about the water that is sold for roughly about $10. You see young women carrying those sachets of water sold for 50 francs in CFA francs, and most people drink that water. So when the decree was deployed, we needed to come up with an alternative, and we didn't see that alternative. And I think that is what caused that decree to be poorly implemented in life. And we also have the industry people. Of course, I am part of the government, so I am speaking from experience. I'm speaking experientially. So we needed to involve more people, and of course we have to take stock of the reasons. Abdoulaye said so well. We need to sensitize. We need to involve the populations in the decision making. As I said before, the plastic has a very strong connotation in our daily lives. So when I went to a woman and she sold me, I bought just a couple of fruit, and I ended up having 5 plastic bags because she used them to serve me my fruit, and I went into my office with 5 plastic sachets. So this speaks volume to the level of impregnation and imbibing of plastics by our community. So we cannot be effective in any measures to cope with plastic use without imbibing and involving the population, without involving them. This is what I wanted to add as my own 5 cents to what Abdoulaye so validly said. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona, would you like to add?
Yes, I would. Firstly, thank you for all those who've already commented. I think quite a wide range of comments were made, which I agree with. I just wanted to say that there is a place for bans, but within reason. I think they can only work on your low-hanging fruit for very specific items that don't have a range of negative effects, as my colleagues have said. Something that I always find a concern, having watched a number of countries introduce bans, is I have noticed that a few of the countries that have introduced 1 or 2 bans on small items then stop dealing with some of the wider issues such as waste mismanagement, or they don't support a circular economy. It's almost as though, okay, well, we're doing that, we're going to wave our flag that is what we're achieving, but not going the next step of what's needed. And so I always have this concern that some of the bans for the easy items that are to ban are rather used as proof of a country showing that they are doing something. And I know that's not necessarily the case, but it does come through as that being the case if waste is not managed correctly through the same government's policies, or if that government doesn't support a circular economy going forward. Talking of successful or unsuccessful bans that have been in place, I'm going to say successfully would be items such as your plastic cotton buds. And this links straight away with Tony's point. It is a product predominantly used by the world's affluent, so it does not affect the marginalized or the world's poor by having that ban. The change of material doesn't affect the quality or the use of the product. It doesn't make people's lifestyles any harder. It doesn't add time onto their day. And as long as what it is replaced with, which in this case is paper, as long as that paper is not coming from the world's rainforests as a source of paper, then there's unlikely to be any unexpected consequences from that sort of ban. At the same time, things like your cotton buds are very much single-use items. It's not like a plastic bag, which in most, or in I'd say every developing country, is not actually a single-use item. And then unsuccessful, I'm not going to really touch on the bags because they've been touched on, but I'm going to just bring up, and there's only one country I know of who has done this, and I don't know the success or the failure of it, but just from a theory point of view, is the ban of disposable diapers. I'd say this is an unsuccessful ban, simply because of the negative effects that come with it. You are affecting those in drought areas that don't have enough fresh water to necessarily wash reusables. You're affecting those people without running waters, and you are unfairly affecting females, specifically because women world over still carry the majority of laundry and childcare. And if you introduce a ban like that, you are reinforcing gender inequality, because that sort of effect can have a negative effect on the woman's time. There are better ways of dealing with that item than an outright ban, for example. I think that's all I have to add. I think my colleagues covered that question very well.
Thank you, Fiona. Joachim, would you like to add some comments?
When Dr. Abdoulaye was speaking, at a point in time, I was wondering whether he listened to the interview that I granted as part of WACA project, because I did provide a whole range of information, a treasure trove of information on these issues. Let me add that sometimes when the issue of plastic ban is raised up, usually I tell people that those that imagine the plastic, those that devise the plastic, maybe they hold the secret to, because when you want to ban plastic, you are likely to fail, because in Togo, that was my advice in 2011 when the government was contemplating banning plastic. I told them that before going to banning, let us go incrementally. Let us ban the production, some types of sachets, and mobilizing the producers to change the calibration of packing or wrapping, because that issue is raised because of the use, because the problem is the product becomes cumbersome when it is stored in the dumping site. If you have solid, robust wrapping or wrapper or packing that can sustain the plastic. Today, almost every country that banned plastic has failed because they did not have a downstream consideration of the sociological dimension of plastic use. So we need to imbibe that parameter before going incrementally toward banning. And that has to be on a sector base. You can't just randomly, or you can't just go for an all-out ban. You have to go sector by sector. Banning plastic in all sectors at a go is likely to put you in the same situation that most countries are finding themselves in after 10 years of ban. The issue behind the failure is that neither the consumers nor the traders or the industry were involved downstream to see concretely how we can solutions, how we can challenge our minds to come up to adequate solutions, rather than having a bottom approach. And this is why we didn't make headway. You don't just ban for the sake of banning. You have to ban when you have alternative workarounds or solutions. And you need to be able to plan ahead. Otherwise, you're likely to find yourself in the quagmire that many countries are into finding themselves into today. So I am not a strong proponent. I cannot vouch that any government was able to succeed. Even if people are quoting countries like Rwanda, well, you have to be on the ground to assess the situation proper. Let me not belabor the point. I think I've expressed myself clearly enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your valuable contributions for this question and for all the other ones raised in the panel this afternoon. It is 5 to 5 here in South Africa, or 5 to 3, I believe, in West Africa. So I think we'll close the session here for today. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating on the panel, and for all those attendees who joined us this afternoon, and for our past sessions. We have had attendees join us from over 40 countries throughout the series, so we're very grateful for the participation that we've had during this plan for developing action plans. So thank you so much, everyone. I think so. We'll close off here for today. Abdoulaye, Tony, I'm not sure if you would like to add any closing words for the final session of the series.
Abdoulaye, you go first.
No, go first, please.
Yeah. Okay, well, to everybody, thank you very much. I'd particularly like to thank the Abidjan Convention and Abdoulaye in person, because he's been absolutely marvelous. And for us, it's been a real privilege to work with the Abidjan Convention on this. We have learned an enormous amount. And to the panelists today, thank you very much for being part of it. Thank you for your contributions. But equally, in hindsight, looking back on this program, we've actually had splendid speakers. They have covered most of the topics. The next steps will be to put together a compilation of all of the talks, including this panel discussion, that will be made available shortly, but it is going to take a bit of time because each of these discussions is quite long. I mean, today we've been running for more than 2 hours, and so it's very difficult to do a full transcription and then editing of this, but it will come out. And this is going to be followed, hopefully, with all of you attending at the Towards Zero Plastics to the Seas of Africa conference in Nelson Mandela Bay in May, just about a year away from now, 2022. So that is going to be another opportunity to take this further. So to all of you, and particularly again to Abdoulaye, thank you very much indeed. And one final special word goes to the translators. You've been absolutely marvelous. Thank you very much. And also a real pleasure to work with you.
And a big thank you from the interpreters. It was a privilege.
Abdoulaye, do you want to go ahead? I missed what you said there.
A big thank you on behalf of the Executive Secretariat, Secretary of Abidjan Convention, Abu Bamba. Let me say a big thank you to all those that participated in this process. The participants were of high pedigree, those that came to participate because they provided us with stamina, they showcased interest, and they proved us right by when we committed ourselves to embark on this process. I must say that this process consists in equipping the Abidjan Convention region of a legal framework to cope with plastic littering along the Atlantic Southwest, going the Atlantic side, the African continent, from Mauritania all the way to South Africa. And that legal framework will help to support the countries of the Abidjan Convention towards elaborating national action plans to cope with plastic littering. And this is a process that is part of the EU-sponsored and the UN Environment and EU-funded program. I would like to support all of them for the support. I would like to thank all the partners. There are many and sundry. For ages, we've been working together, and we would like to say our most massive thank you for taking time and energy aside. This has been outstanding and remarkable. The conversations that we had as part of the preparation of this webinar. We were anticipating to have sessions for Anglophones and Lusophones, or Portuguese-speaking people, and Francophones. And we decided to go on single sessions and resort to simultaneous translation, interpreting, so that all the experts can challenge their minds and storm their brains. Today, Abidjan, we having both English speaking and French speaking. This was made possible by way of the quality of the translation provided by our partners of Mr. Nantier. I'd like to say a big thank you to Mr. Nantier, and I think that we can have a good token of the appreciation, because last week I recommended them to other partners. So we've gone beyond the language barrier thanks to your expertise and your attendance. A big thank you for the work, the excellent work together. As I close, let me say a special thanks to the fantastic team that worked together, the Abidjan Convention, but I cannot commend myself, but I know I have Vanessa, our Shiro, Ariel Mendel, William Dada, the part of Abidjan Convention, Tony, and Tara, everyone, part of the team. I lack words to say thank you. You were massively extraordinary. You set the bar very high. We were not always there to see what is going to be done or whatever. I think is important. For those, I'm speaking now for those behind the did and Process African Marine Network that they did handle this by anticipating and exceeding our expectation. We couldn't have found better. So special thanks to Tony, supermassive thanks to Tara, the entire team that worked with you. And I hope I left no one out. This was a job well done. The bad news is that all our partners are requesting us to request us for plastic management. Now we have someone that we can look up to. You will be there. We will recommend you when people request, especially from West Africa, people request the support in implementing or elaborating their policies. On a final note, Tara, I would like to say that the work that has started has begun to yield fruit, and we did initiate collaboration with WWF and an institution in Germany that is helping us, supporting us, and for this international treaty. A big thank you, supermassive. Big thank you to Tony, your entire teams, all your partners. A big thank you.
Thank you, Abdoulaye, for those closing words. And I'd just like to reiterate what they've said. Thank you so much, Abdoulaye, Tony, and Sonali, and our translators, and everyone who's played a role in making this happen. Thank you again to our panelists for this afternoon. And if anyone has any further questions watching the recordings, please feel free to email us, and we can pass those along to the specific speakers from the series. Thank you so much, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful day further, and we look forward to collaborating with you on future projects and working towards zero plastics to the seas. Thank you, everyone.
Just if you allow me just to thank all our panelists, all of you here today, and all of those who was here with us during this 2 months. Thank you to all of you, and just know that it's not the end. It's just a point, let's say a turning point. We will be developing the booklet, and then we will continue for action.
Thank you, Abdoulaye. Yes, everyone, please be sure to look out for the booklet that will be coming out, and we look forward to your contributions to that. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a long road, and we're very grateful for all the input that we've received. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon or evening, depending where you're joining us from the world.